Far more than we think. Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 22. Now is all there is. Having concluded that love is all we need, we now move on to the next key spiritual truth. Now is all there is. This seems like stating the obvious, but this is one of those truths we all know, yet somehow we manage to ignore most of the time. Being in the moment of now is simple in theory, but in day-to-day life we find it impossible to achieve because our minds don't seem to work like that. The way forward is first to understand the incredible power that lies within the present moment and why that is, and then to introduce simple, short practices that will help us become increasingly present. This chapter explores why it is that the present moment is so important to spiritual growth and fulfillment. Starting with the basics, we see our lives as consisting of past, present, and future. This encapsulates our understanding of time, in that time itself moves on relentlessly and seems to be the heartbeat of our existence. Watching a second hand on a clock clearly shows the movement of time as it progresses from one moment to the next. Time stands still for no man, as the saying goes. The clock starts ticking the moment we're born and continues second by second until we die. Our whole lives are driven and controlled by the daily rotation of our planet on its axis and its annual orbit of the sun. We often don't seem to have enough time, and when we do, we feel we ought to be doing something useful to occupy our minds. Spending time doing nothing is considered pointless by many of us. It's said to be a waste of time. Time itself is also prone to illusion. Interestingly, my perception of time has changed over the years as I grow older, and this seems to be true for most of us. When I was a child, summers seemed to go on forever, and there was all the time in the world. These days, the years go by frighteningly quickly, and no sooner do the Christmas decorations come down one year than the shops seem to be starting festive promotions all over again, and another year slips by. Time seems to be speeding up, yet the second hand on my watch is going around at exactly the same speed. So we have past, present, and future. Today becomes yesterday's tomorrow, but at the same time, today is tomorrow's yesterday. We tend to experience or perhaps tolerate today, but spend most of our time thinking about the past or the future. I found this difficult to accept at first, but upon honest examination, I have to admit it was true. My mind was either repeatedly going over things from the past, or obsessively thinking about the future. And this happens whether my thoughts are positive or negative. Happy memories from the past, or looking forward to some happy future event one minute, and then bad memories from the past and worrying about the future the next. I was spending the vast majority of my time engaged in mental movies of the past or the future, with me as the director and the main actor. I suspect many of us are the same. This inability to stop thinking is a burden for us, yet it's considered part of being human and judged as normal. Our inner voices provide a relentless commentary on life, consisting of opinions, judgments, comparisons, regrets, projections, complaints, approvals, disapprovals, and so on. Compulsive thinking is akin to an addiction, in that we can't stop it even if we wanted to. Instead of accepting what is happening and focusing on enjoying the experience of life as it is, we mentally try to rewrite history and at the same time dream of a brighter future. Meanwhile, the present moment passes us by. Past trauma is so difficult to release, yet objectively we know we can't go back and change anything. The past is gone, and what's more, it can't hurt us anymore, yet we hold on to it for dear life. We go over painful experiences time and time again, wishing they were different. We hold resentments and anger inside for harms done to us, or we carry guilt and shame for the things that we have done, or allowed to be done, to ourselves or to others. Learning from experience is clearly a good thing, but instead of just carrying the lessons, we carry the whole lorry load of baggage around with us. Often something will happen in the present moment that triggers these memories, and the whole cycle of revisiting and reliving the past starts again. As well as consciously revisiting the past, we also carry a lot of subconscious memories and beliefs, and these too can surface as automatic and sometimes bewildering behaviour. We can spend a lot of time going over our past lives, trying to figure out why we are so damaged and why we continue to behave in harmful ways. We saw in the cycle of the mind how our thinking impacts our emotions, and so it is that obsessive thinking about the past causes continuing pain and suffering. There often seems no escape, yet it's our own minds that create the prison in which we dwell. The only way out is to accept the past as it is, without wishing it could have been different. On a logical level, this is incredibly simple, because we know the past cannot be changed, and we may as well accept it. If we've been at fault, we can always take steps to make amends where possible. On an emotional level, however, we find it difficult to let go of the past. The key is to apply the cycle of the mind and take a broader perspective of the past. We try to see and accept the underlying truths, and then we can suspend judgment. Just like our earlier example of the two people passing in the street, it's possible to replace pain with compassion, simply by thinking differently. The emotions will follow the thoughts. I'm talking generally here, and I accept that many people have deeply rooted issues that may require specialist approaches. At the end of the day, though, however specialized and necessary a treatment may be, the bottom line is that the past cannot be changed. Ultimately, we have a choice whether to dwell in the past, consciously or subconsciously, or whether to take action to accept it and move on. The main reason we choose not to move on is that we identify so strongly with our individual stories that our sense of self, our ego, does not want to let go. This applies to good and bad memories. Our ego identification is based on our history, so we cling to the past. Before we go down the route of ego again, let's move on to our sense of the future. Most of us invest heavily in the future. Good or bad, the future takes up a lot of our thinking time. When we're not thinking about the past, we tend to be projecting into the future, sometimes making plans, but mainly just imagining and anticipating what it will be like. When we're feeling positive, the future is where everything is going to be good. Once we get enough money, find the perfect partner, live in the perfect location, recover from illness, and have time on our hands to indulge our passions, we will be happy. It's considered worth putting up with short-term discomfort in order to build for the future. No pain, no gain. Besides, we could treat ourselves along the way with treats to look forward to and holidays in which to relax and recover. Things may be a bit grim at the moment, but this time next month we will be on the beach enjoying life. Well, I spent 30 years building to a point where I would be happy, only to then realise it was never going to happen the way I'd planned. I was focusing on external things to make me happy, some of which I had and some of which I still wanted, but I now see that the external things were never going to bring me the happiness I coveted. One of the many wonderful gifts of spirituality is the realization that we already have everything we need to be happy right here inside ourselves. There's nothing else to get or own or experience. There's no end to the things we could wish to get or own or experience, but regardless of how much we already have, we will always want more, because we keep on raising the bar. The funny thing is that the happiness that comes from a spiritual way of life is far greater than anything we can ever get from money, material possessions, achievements, experiences, or relationships. This is perhaps difficult to believe, but it has been my joyful experience and the experience of many people whom I've spoken with. Already having everything we need to be happy, immediately at hand, brings a wonderful feeling of contentment. It helps us to stop dreaming about some future state of nirvana and focus on what we already have. The other side of the coin in terms of the future is the dreaded modern affliction of worry and stress. Just like there's no end to the things we could want, there seems to be no end to the things we can worry about. As well as our own problems, we're also constantly bombarded with news stories about all the problems in the world. We're reminded on a daily basis of disaster, famine, economic meltdown, unemployment, environmental destruction, crime, injustice, and so on. The world is portrayed as being full of danger. The thing about worry is that it's rooted in fear. Whether it's low-level anxiety, daily worry, stress, despair, or full-blown panic, it's a matter of degree. The underlying mindset is the familiar landscape of fear based on ego. We fear the future and can't escape it. Many of our worries relate to basic security in the form of money and employment, but you also worry about things such as comfort, being judged, personal appearance, health, diet, children, parents, other family members, friends, neighbourhood, community, and national and worldwide issues. The potential problems facing us are enormous, and we spend a great deal of time projecting into the future and worrying. Many people rely on mind-altering substances or behaviours, such as alcohol, nicotine, drugs, gambling, sex, compulsive exercise, or shopping, to cope with it all. We will cover these in greater detail later, but for now the key point is that we live with these worries and pressures and all have our own coping strategies. Often we worry about things without having any idea what the solution might be. Planning appropriate action to address situations as they arise or are anticipated to arise is a good use of the mind, but worrying endlessly without any hope of resolution is futile because it doesn't help. All it does is cause suffering, and in some cases it can actually make matters worse. All of the worry and the resulting coping strategies are caused by a basic ego-driven fear that things are going to go wrong. Either things will not turn out as we want them to, or, in extremis, we will end up with no money, nowhere to live, nothing to eat, nobody to take care of us, and basically unable to survive. For most of us, this second scenario is extremely unlikely, yet we still find plenty to worry about. And not satisfied with our own worries, we will often amazingly involve ourselves in other people's worries and problems, and become affected by them too. Many of us love the drama of life, and perversely, we're not really happy unless we have something to worry or moan about. So we live in a wonderful world and have everything we need to be blissful, yet we spend most of our time thinking about or reacting to the past, or pining for the future, or despairing of what the future may bring. What is it that drives us to behave this way? Why have we taken paradise and turned it into our personal version of an assault course? Well, the answer relates back to two of our earlier discussions. Firstly, we have the conditioning that we receive as children, and the resulting programming of the subconscious mind that creates our ego. And secondly, we experience the cycle of the mind, which reinforces our ego and causes us to believe totally in ourselves as separate beings. The ego is rooted in fear and survival. The ego is running the show and does not want or allow anything to threaten its dominance. The ego does not like spiritual ideas. The ego keeps us stuck in the past or worrying about the future, and this prevents us from perceiving the current moment for what it is. The current moment contains neither the past nor the future. The current moment is right now, and it's perfect. As you read these very words, everything in our past has already happened and is gone, and everything in our respective futures has yet to happen. If we can accept everything as it is right now, in this moment, we are immediately present. This is the present moment. The importance of the present moment in spiritual terms is that the present moment does not need to contain fear. The fears we hold relate to what we imagine may happen in the future, or, more directly, to our perception of what we're seeing right now and our projection of that view into a future scenario. There's nothing to fear in the actual moment. So true presence brings feelings of safety, contentment and serenity. Instead of resisting what's happening, we embrace it as it is. We can still act to change it if we choose, but we do so from a position of acceptance rather than resistance. This makes sense because it's futile to resist something that already is. Unhappiness and struggle can melt away only when we embrace the present moment without wishing it were different. Being present in the moment can be quite difficult to achieve at first, because it's not something that we do very often, if at all. There are several methods to practice presence, but they all have one thing in common: to focus our attention on one single thing to the exclusion of all else. When we relax, our minds are generally still busily engaged in watching TV, reading, listening to music, or whatever else we do to wind down. Conversely, pure focus enables the mind to be quiet and to momentarily stop. Once the mind stops, fear goes, and we can be fully present in the current moment. No sooner has this happened than a thought comes into our head and we are off again, thinking about all manner of things. With practice, it becomes easier to recognize that we have started to think again, so we can gently bring ourselves back to the single point of focus and return to the present moment. This is essentially the practice of meditation, which takes many forms. Part 4 of this book will cover meditation in more detail, together with various other spiritual tools and techniques. This may all seem ridiculously simple and easy to do, but I cannot stress enough the importance of connecting with the present moment in order to allow spiritual growth. It is, if you like, the gateway to eventual enlightenment, and we can all do it, starting right now, if we want to. My experience is that it may be simple, but it's not that easy, not at first. The ego is cunning, baffling and powerful. It is a formidable foe that is firmly in position and will not surrender without a fight. The ego will tend to resist all spiritual ideas until either our physical and mental circumstances deteriorate to such an extent that we are desperate for help, or perhaps the conscious mind overrides the subconscious mind by reading books, such as this one, and decides to take some positive action. Even then we will come up with all sorts of excuses to delay. My excuses for avoiding spirituality included seeing it all as silly and irrelevant, not wanting to admit defeat, believing I was in charge of my own destiny, not having enough time, not being in the mood, and so on. I didn't even have the handicap of already having entrenched religious views, which can make things even more difficult. Religions try to force specific spiritual ideas upon us, which either we adopt, largely due to fear of what will happen if we don't, or we reject as not necessary for modern day living. If we have religious views, it may make it challenging for us to adopt new spiritual practices. We believe the doctrine of our existing religion to be sufficient, unquestionable, and sacrosanct. I will cover my understanding of the relationship between spirituality and religion towards the end of this book, but for now, suffice to say that I have no desire to question or alter anybody's existing beliefs or practices. I should also say again that what I've discovered and written about may not be totally right and may not be appropriate or relevant for anybody else. There are, however, increasing numbers of people who are adopting spiritual principles in their lives, not through blind faith, but because the wisdom contained therein makes perfect sense. One of these principles is that the only way to gain access to our spiritual selves is to begin to escape from our egos by connecting with the present moment. One way to focus on the present moment is to close our eyes and visualize a pair of closed curtains, with the left curtain representing the past and the right one the future. In our mind we stretch out our hands and separate the curtains slightly, and then focus on the gap between them, whatever that may look like. This gap is the present moment, existing between the past and the future. Meditation is powerful and can be practiced in many forms. If I had to choose just one overriding message from this book, it would be that meditation is an essential ingredient for spiritual growth. It really does work. I would encourage anyone to give it a try on a sustained basis. We have nothing to lose and far more to gain than we might imagine. Being present in the moment is important in the context of spiritual growth, but it also raises the vexed question of time itself. I mentioned above that time is prone to illusion, and upon investigation I find that time can be a confusing subject indeed. In spiritual terms, the concept is that time does not exist, and that our thoughts about time are illusory, in much the same way as our experience of form is illusory. We talked about matter and energy in an earlier chapter, and that gave some credence to the idea of universal form being illusory. But wrapping my head around time being an illusion has been more challenging. All I can do is share with you where I've got to so far. The first thing to acknowledge is that time is a man-made concept. time is the annual orbit of the Earth around the Sun, divided into months, weeks and days, and the daily rotation of the planet itself, divided into hours, minutes, seconds and fractions thereof. And there's not much logic or consistency in the scales used, and some of it appears quite weird. 365 days per year, 12 months of differing lengths, 7 days in a week, but 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour, and 60 seconds in a minute. And even the number of days in a year changes every 4th year to keep it all in order. Obviously, all of this is driven by the Earth's orbit and spin, but the actual system of time that we use is man-made. Time doesn't make the world go around, but the world going around does make time. We invented time in order to make sense of what is actually happening. When we add to that the cycle of birth and death in the natural world, this gives added impetus to the concept of time. Each life has a start point and an end point in time. Time is such an ingrained part of our existence that we rarely stop to question it. Yet there is one unfathomable problem with our concept of time, which is that time is infinite. It has no beginning and no end. From the present moment, our concept of time extends infinitely backwards to the Big Bang, and presumably beyond, unless of course time only started at the Big Bang, in which case what happened to time before then? In addition to that problem, time also extends infinitely forward from this moment and will never end, unless something happens to bring it to an end. But even then, something must happen to time beyond that. This conundrum is familiar to all of us, yet we ignore it most of the time. We rely totally on our man-made concept of time, without ever resolving this fundamental problem in our minds. One conclusion is there must be something wrong with our concept of time. This leads us to explore an alternative explanation, which does require a bit of a stretch of logic. If we think about this moment, we probably think about this second. 1 second is the smallest unit of time that we normally use in daily life. However, when we think of a sports event, we instantly accept the concept of tenths, hundredths, and even thousandths of a second. In fact, a single second can be divided into any number of subunits. A unit of time can be infinitesimally small. There's no end to how small a moment of time can be, because however small it is, it can always be subdivided further, and further still. The same principle applies in aggregating time, in that there's no limit to how big a unit of time can be. We talk about decades, centuries and millennia, but again, these are man-made concepts. Time as we understand it consists of millennia of milliseconds, but a unit of time could be infinitely big because there's no end to the aggregation that can take place. But herein lies the key to a different way of thinking about time. If a moment of time can be infinitely small or infinitely big, then a moment of time is immeasurable. We know that the present moment exists because we're experiencing it. Well, logically then, the moment of now can be infinitely small or infinitely big. The moment of now is infinite. The moment of now can be seen to contain everything that has ever happened or ever will happen. Now is all there is. When we connect with the moment of now, we connect with everything that ever was and ever will be. Another way of viewing this is to consider the totality of time as a sphere, which is then cut into an infinite number of slices, with each slice representing the moment of now. As our concept of time progresses, we move from one slice of time to the next, experiencing each as we go without ever seeing the whole picture. Our limited experience of time, even covering billions of years, is contained within a tiny fraction of the slices. This puts our lifetimes of up to 100 orbits of the Earth around the Sun into rather stark contrast. Time is but a slice of all that is now. A different angle again is to think about infinite time being universal information recorded on a CD. As we play a music CD, the disc rotates and a laser follows the spiral of information. The resulting music is the reproduction of the individual sounds, represented by the digits recorded on the track. If we think of ourselves as individual, unique lasers experiencing universal information as it plays out, we can grasp a concept that it's not time that's passing, but us who are passing over time. The CD contains everything that has or will ever happen, and all we're doing is experiencing our infinitesimally tiny part. Each unique laser experiences the recording in a different way, and this gives potential purpose to our lives. The CD of universal information or knowledge is turned into individual experiences by virtue of our existence. We are the collective consciousness which makes the universe manifest. The whole variety of life experiences itself through living, and our individual lives are part of that experience. This idea of an infinite universal CD gives us a further chance to see how all of time could exist at once. It also opens up the possibility of experiencing different parts of the CD in the same moment, and that may then begin to explain why some people seem to be able to recall the long-distant past with such accuracy, or, alternatively, see and apparently predict the future. My final thoughts on time come from reflecting on the nature of the relative world as I now see it. As mentioned in a previous chapter, darkness is what exists in the absence of light, and light cannot exist without the darkness in which to shine. If everything were light, then an individual light could not be seen. It would be lost in the brilliance of all the existing light. And likewise, darkness cannot be experienced except in contrast to light. So darkness and light need each other and exist together. And the same principle applies with space and form. Space is what exists in the absence of form, but form cannot exist without the space within which to appear. If everything were form, there would be no distinct identification of any individual thing, because it would all be one big lump. Likewise, space cannot be experienced except in contrast to form. So, space and form need each other and exist together. The next pairing is silence and sound. Silence is what exists in the absence of sound, and sound cannot exist without the silence in which to be heard. If everything were sound, no individual sound could be heard, because it would all be drowned out by all the other sound. And likewise, silence cannot be experienced except in contrast to sound. So, silence and sound need each other and exist together. This is all a bit repetitive, but it's a good way to get to the current topics of now and time. Now is what exists in the absence of time, and time cannot exist without the now within which to appear. If all of time existed at once, an individual moment of time could not be experienced, because it would be lost in all of time. And likewise, now cannot be experienced, except in contrast to time. So, now and time need each other and exist together. So what we have here is the base reality of darkness, space, silence and now, which are made manifest by the existence of light, form, sound and time. So what we have is infinite darkness, infinite space, infinite silence and infinite now. And light, form, sound and time are manifestations of source energy perceived by us as reality. In the broadest sense, it can be seen that light, form, sound and time are all illusions perceived by our senses and existing only in our minds. So our firm grasp of time can quickly be challenged in just a few paragraphs, and what emerges is that time is a man-made illusion. Now is all there is. The most important time is now. The most important person is the one who you are with now. The most important thing you do is what you are doing now. The best way to prepare for the future is to be totally present now. This is it, right now. The moment of now is one of our fundamental underlying realities, and we can connect to it simply by being present through focus and stillness of the mind. Once we do this, our awareness of all that is will begin to grow. Now is the moment that never ends. Now is all there is.